I've always loved a good ghost story. Who doesn't? But what I'm about to tell you isn't just another campfire tale. This story, it's real. My name is James Carter. I'm no stranger to fear, but what happened to me on that cold night in November still keeps me awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if it was all just a nightmare. It all started when I was invited to join an expedition with a couple of my old college friends, Sarah and William. They were both history buffs, obsessed with legends and folklore. They'd come across an old naval map of the Atlantic, rumored to be cursed. Of course, I didn't believe in curses or ghost ships, but I was wrong, dead wrong. We were supposed to be tracking down the remains of an ancient shipwreck, something William claimed was hidden off the coast of Maine. He kept going on about this ship that had disappeared in the early 1700s, something about the crew vanishing without a trace and the ship cursed to sail the waters for eternity. I shrugged it off. What's the worst that could happen, right? But as soon as we set sail, things started to feel off. The sea, which had been calm earlier, suddenly became choppy. The sky darkened faster than it should have. But none of us spoke about it. We all felt it, the tension, the unease. By nightfall, we were miles from the coast, completely surrounded by water. That's when Sarah spotted something on the horizon. "Look, over there. Do you see that?" she whispered, pointing toward a faint light. At first, we thought it was just another boat, but the closer we got, the clearer it became that this wasn't any ordinary ship. It was old, rusted, and massive. The sails were tattered and flapping violently in the wind, even though there wasn't a breeze strong enough to move them. We should have turned back right then and there, but something about that ship pulled us in, like we were being called, like we were meant to find it. We sailed closer until we were right alongside it, staring at the colossal vessel. There wasn't a single sign of life aboard, no movement, no sounds, just silence. But then the fog rolled in, thick, heavy fog that seemed to swallow the world around us. I could barely see the outline of the ship anymore. That's when the real nightmare began. I'll never forget the feeling that washed over me in that moment. It was as if a cold hand had gripped my heart and squeezed. I looked at Sarah and William. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear. But none of us said a word. And that's when we heard it, the faint sound of footsteps coming from the deck of the ghost ship. We exchanged glances, trying to rationalize what we were hearing. There couldn't possibly be anyone aboard. This ship had been lost for centuries. But the footsteps continued, slow and deliberate. They echoed through the silence, growing louder and louder, until it felt like they were right behind us. "Who's there?" William shouted, his voice shaking. No answer. Just the relentless sound of footsteps, now circling us. We could feel eyes on us, like we were being watched by something that didn't belong in this world. Something ancient, malevolent, and very much real. In the distance, a low, eerie creaking filled the air as if the ship itself was breathing. The fog swirled around us, and suddenly, we weren't sure if we were still on our own boat or if we'd been pulled into the belly of that cursed vessel. We could feel it. We weren't alone anymore. Now, I've got a question for you. If you were in our shoes, what would you do? Would you leave the ghost ship and sail away to safety, or would you stay and uncover the mystery? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you're still with me, because this story is just getting started. William's voice echoed in the thick fog. "Who's there?" But there was no reply, just those footsteps, circling us like we were prey. I tried to make sense of what was happening. Could this be real? A ship that had been lost for centuries, and now something was walking aboard it. My heart raced as I gripped the edge of our boat. Sarah stood frozen, her eyes wide with fear, while William scanned the darkness, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever or whoever was on that ship. Then suddenly, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. We stood there, holding our breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But nothing did, just the eerie sound of the ocean gently rocking our boat. I looked at Sarah. "Do we go aboard?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't answer. None of us did, but we all knew what was going to happen. We were already too deep. There was no turning back now. We tied our boat to the side of the ghost ship, the wooden hull creaking ominously as we climbed up the rope ladder one by one. The deck was covered in moss and rotting wood, and it smelled like salt water and something else. Something old, something decayed. My stomach churned as I glanced at Sarah and William, who were both looking around in awe and fear. Suddenly a faint whisper drifted through the air, barely audible over the creaking of the ship. It was a voice, soft and distant, but unmistakably real. "I heard it too," Sarah muttered, her eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. We followed the sound, moving deeper into the ship's deck. The fog was thick, swirling around us like a living thing. Every creak of the wood beneath our feet felt like it was leading us somewhere we didn't want to go, but we couldn't stop. The whispering grew louder the closer we got to the center of the ship. And then we saw it. There, lying in the middle of the deck, was a large wooden chest. It was old, covered in barnacles and seaweed, but strangely intact. Something about it felt wrong, like it didn't belong here, like it was waiting for us. Without thinking, William stepped forward and reached for the chest. "Wait!" I shouted, grabbing his arm, but it was too late. The moment his hand touched the wood, the air around us shifted. The fog thickened, swirling violently, and the temperature dropped even further. The whispering turned into a low, guttural growl, and then out of nowhere, we heard the footsteps again. But this time, they weren't distant. They were right behind us. We spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the fog, just the empty deck. But the sound of those footsteps, they were getting closer, circling us again, faster this time. "We need to go. Now," I said, panic rising in my chest. But William, eyes locked on the chest, shook his head. "We came this far. We can't leave without knowing what's inside." Before I could stop him, he knelt down and opened the chest. The moment the lid creaked open, the wind howled, and the deck beneath us groaned like it was alive. Inside the chest was nothing. Just a pile of old, tattered clothes, soaked with seawater. And yet the air around us felt charged, like something had been released, something we couldn't see, but could feel watching us. And then we heard the voice again. But this time, it was clear. "Leave." A single word, whispered with such force that it felt like it was coming from inside our heads. The footsteps stopped, but the presence remained. We could feel it. "We should have left when we had the chance," Sarah muttered under her breath, backing away from the chest. I nodded, my throat dry. "We're leaving. Now." We turned to head back to our boat, but the fog had swallowed everything. We couldn't see more than a few feet in front of us, and then, as if the ship itself was alive, the wooden planks under our feet began to shift and creak, making it almost impossible to keep our balance. And that's when we saw them. Figures, shadowy, translucent figures, moving through the fog, drifting toward us like wraiths. There were dozens of them, their faces blurred, their bodies half-transparent, flickering in and out of sight. They were the crew. or what was left of them. We froze in place, our breath hitching in our throats as the figures came closer. They didn't speak, but their eyes, hollow and dark, were fixed on us. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the blood rushing in my ears. We had to get out of here, now. But the fog was thick and the ship was alive with the sound of those footsteps, echoing all around us. The wraiths were closing in, and I could feel their cold, deathly presence wrapping around us like a shroud. And then, just as I thought we were done for, they stopped. The figures, the footsteps, the whispers, everything stopped. Silence fell over the ship once more. We turned back toward the chest, and that's when we saw it, the figure of a man standing right beside it. He was tall, his face obscured by shadow, but there was something unmistakably wrong about him. His clothes were old, tattered like the ones in the chest, and his eyes were glowing faintly in the fog. Who are you?" William stammered, stepping back. The figure didn't answer. It just stood there, watching us, like it was waiting for something. I knew then that we had awakened something ancient, something that had been lying dormant for centuries, and now it wanted us. Our feet moved as if pulled by an unseen force, like we had lost control of our own bodies. It was as though the ship itself was dragging us toward its mysterious fate. The shadows around us began to fade slowly, but the fear inside each of us was still very much alive. Who was this man that had appeared, and how had he gotten here? William stood frozen, unable to move, his eyes locked on the figure standing by the chest. Then suddenly, the man spoke in a low voice, sharp, like the sound of a strong wind, but clear. "You came looking for the truth, didn't you?" His words hung in the air, heavy with menace. None of us could answer. It felt like speaking would break some fragile barrier holding the darkness at bay. "What truth?" I finally whispered, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The figure stepped closer, his glowing eyes burning through the fog. "The truth about this ship, about those who board and never leave, about the curse that binds us all to these waters." Sarah gasped, and I could feel my heart thudding in my chest. "What curse?" William asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure's gaze turned towards the chest. "This ship was lost long ago, its crew trapped between life and death for eternity. Those who board seeking riches, fame, or power, they never leave. They become part of the crew, just like the rest of us." I took a step back, my stomach twisting in knots. "We don't want anything from this ship. We need to get him," Sarah said, her voice shaking with panic. "We can't leave him." I shook my head, my mind racing. "We can't help him if we're dead. We have to keep moving." Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with fear and doubt. But she knew I was right. We had to keep going. If we stayed here, we'd end up like the others, the lost crew trapped for eternity. We turned and ran, heading for the side of the ship where we had tied up our boat. But when we got there, the boat, it was gone. Just like that, disappeared into the mist. "No," I whispered, my heart sinking. No. Sarah clutched my arm, her voice barely audible. "What do we do now?" Panic started to creep in, but I forced myself to think. There had to be another way off this ship. There had to be something we could do. But then, as if in response to our desperation, the figure's voice echoed through the fog once more. "You belong to the ship now." I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure was standing there again, closer this time, his eyes burning with a cold, eerie light. "You can't leave," he said, his voice low and menacing. "The ship has claimed you." Sarah's grip tightened on my arm. "We have to fight this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We can't let it take us." I nodded, though I had no idea how we were supposed to fight something like this, something that was ancient, something beyond our understanding. But we had to try. "We need to find William," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe he's still alive." Sarah nodded, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. But we didn't have any other options. We couldn't stay here, and we couldn't leave. The only thing we could do was move forward. We turned back toward the ship, the fog thickening around us, and I could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on me. Every step felt heavier than the last, like the ship was trying to pull us down into its depths. As we made our way across the deck, the whispering started again, soft at first but growing louder with every step. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was dozens, maybe even hundreds, all whispering the same thing. "Join us." The voices grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel the air around us growing colder, the ship's hold tightening. The deck beneath our feet groaned and creaked like it was alive. And then out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move in the fog. A shadow. No, not just one. Many. The crew. The lost crew of the ghost ship. They were watching us. The shadowy figures of the lost crew emerged from the fog, their hollow eyes fixated on us. They were close now, too close. I could see the tattered remnants of their uniforms, the hollowed-out expressions on their faces, and the unsettling emptiness in their eyes. They weren't just watching us, they were waiting. I grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her closer. "We have to keep moving. We need to find William." But Sarah wasn't moving. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the ghostly crew. "Do you see them?" she whispered, her voice trembling. They're coming for us." I followed her gaze and my heart sank. The crew wasn't just standing there anymore. They were moving toward us, their footsteps slow but deliberate, as if they had all the time in the world, as if they knew there was no escape. "Run!" I shouted, pulling Sarah with me. We bolted across the deck, but the ship seemed to stretch endlessly, like we were trapped in some kind of nightmare loop. The fog thickened, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in front of us, and the whispers grew louder, filling my ears. "Join us! Join us!" The words echoed in my mind, twisting my thoughts, making it harder to think clearly. I could feel the pull of the ship, the weight of its curse pressing down on me, trying to drag me under. "We need to get off the deck," I said, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "Maybe if we go below—" But Sarah shook her head, her face pale with terror. "No, we can't go down there. That's where they are. That's where he is." She was right. The figure, the one who had appeared out of nowhere, wasn't here on the deck. He was waiting below, in the darkness. But we didn't have a choice. The crew was closing in, their ghostly figures reaching out for us, their voices growing louder, more insistent. "We don't have time," I said, pulling her toward the hatch that led below deck. "We have to try." We descended into the belly of the ship, the air growing colder and thicker with each step. The wooden steps creaked beneath our feet, and I could feel the ship's age in every groan of the boards. It felt like the ship was alive, like it was breathing, waiting for us to slip up. The lower deck was worse, dark, damp, and filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. The walls seemed to close in on us, and the smell of rot and decay hung in the air. But it wasn't empty. William, he was there, lying on the ground, his body limp and unmoving. "William!" I rushed to his side, my heart racing. I knelt beside him, shaking him, hoping for any sign of life. "William, wake up! Please!" Sarah hovered behind me, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "We need to go. We need to get out of here now." But William didn't stir. His face was pale, his skin cold to the touch. For a moment I thought he was gone, but then his eyes fluttered open. "Will," I whispered, relief washing over me. "Thank God, you're alive." But William didn't respond. His eyes were wide, unseeing, his mouth moving, but no words came out. It was like he was trapped in some kind of trance, locked inside his own mind. "We need to move," I said, lifting him to his feet. He was heavy, but together, Sarah and I managed to get him standing. Suddenly a cold draft swept through the room, and the door we had entered slammed shut behind us. The figure was there again, standing in the doorway, his cold eyes glowing in the dim light. "You cannot leave," he said, his voice a hollow echo. Panic surged through me. The figure stepped closer, and the temperature dropped even more, the air turning frigid. I could feel the weight of his presence, the overwhelming sense of despair that came with him. "We don't belong here," I shouted, my voice cracking. "Let us go." The figure's eyes bore into mine. "Once you step aboard, you belong to the ship. There is no escape." Sarah backed up against the wall, her eyes darting around the room, searching for any way out. But there was none. "Why us?" I demanded. "What do you want?" The figure tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "The ship hungers. It needs souls to stay alive. And now, it has yours." The room seemed to close in around us, the walls tightening, the air growing so cold it hurt to breathe. The figure took another step forward, and I could feel the ship itself groaning beneath us, as if it was feeding off our fear. I knew then, deep down, that there was no escape. The ship wasn't just cursed, it was alive, and it needed us to survive. But I wasn't ready to give up. "Come on," I shouted to Sarah. "We need to break through that door." Together we rushed at the door, slamming into it with all our strength. The wood cracked, but it didn't give. Behind us, the figure stood still, watching with an eerie calm. "You cannot escape your fate," he said, and just like that, the fog swallowed us whole. The last thing I remember was the cold, the overwhelming cold, and the sound of the ship creaking beneath my feet. Then, nothing. I don't know if we ever escaped. I don't know if we're still on that ship, trapped like the rest of the lost crew, or if we ever made it back to the real world. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the sound of the sea, the faint creaking of wood, and the whispers. Always the whispers join us. Now, here's a question for you, the one listening to this story. What would you do if you found yourself on a ship like this? Would you fight to escape, or would you accept your fate? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this story. And remember, the sea always keeps its secrets